My mother was a young woman. My father was often in another city, and we lived at home with my uncle and grandmother. I had seen my uncle and my mother sleeping in the same room many times. One day, it was too late. In the morning, I left my room for breakfast, and my mother's room was locked from the inside. I looked in through the window and felt embarrassed because my uncle was looking at my mother from the other side. But as soon as I laid eyes on my real mother's back, my eyes widened because my mother's whole. I was 13 years old when this incident happened. My father was a personal assistant, so he often went on trips with the officer and did not come home for 2 or 3 days. Apart from me, there was my grandmother, mother and uncle at home. After returning from school, I would go to my room to rest for a while and do homework in the evening. After some time, I would play outside, and after dinner, it was my routine to go to bed. My grandmother would pray in her room all day. My mother was in the kitchen and my uncle was preparing for MPhil. Life was going on a very smooth path, peacefully and without worries. There was no worry or fear. But suddenly, a person appeared in my life whom I could never have imagined. It was like Sunday. I would lie down for a while and freshen up and come to the dining table to have breakfast. When I heard the sound of conversation coming from my mother's room, I felt that my father had come late at night. I was very happy in my heart and thought that I would have breakfast with my father today. I went towards his room and realized that it was not my father's voice. The door of the room was slightly open. I peeked in and saw that it was not my father's voice. I lost consciousness. I cannot describe the state in which I saw my mother and uncle. I could not believe my eyes. Even though I refused to accept this fact 100 times, the truth could not be denied. My brain was starting to burst. It was unbearable for me to stand there any longer. I went to my room without having breakfast. I locked myself in the room for several hours. My mother came to ask, but I hated her voice too. Then I left the house without telling her and returned home late at night. Now I was changing day by day. My mother and uncle were completely normal in front of me, but now I was not normal. Both were equally guilty for me. Even if I wanted to, that scene could not be hidden from my eyes. When my father came, I could not even meet his eyes, but my mother did not know how she would meet his eyes. Along with deceiving my father, she was deceiving herself as well. My attention was diverted from my studies and I was always irritable. I reduced my conversation with my mother and stopped eating food from her hand. After a few days, it was as if a lightning bolt had struck me. 100 thoughts arose in my mind. My father was very happy and took more care of my mother than before. But I was not happy about this, but rather sad. But my mother did not seem to care about this. Whether this child was legitimate or illegitimate. We spent our time doing whatever we could and now a boy was born. My father and mother tried very hard to raise him with love, but I hated him. He grew up and with it, my hatred also grew. I had done my FA. After my grandmother's death, I did not feel at home. Shakir Bai lived next to my house. He had been in Italy for 5 years on a job. I talked to my father and asked him to send me to Italy under his supervision. I did not want to stay here. My father was worried about my condition anyway. He got all the papers done and started making arrangements for me to go and sent me to Italy with Shakir Bai. After I went there, my health improved a bit because I had left the ill-fated house. Here I was with my mother and I didn't have to see my uncle's hypocrisy. I would call my father once or twice a week to check on him, but if my mother answered the call, I would hang up. I continued my education and at the same time kept looking for a job so that I wouldn't be a burden on Shakir Bai. In a short time, I got a good post and started sending my salary to my father. Shakir Bai had to go to Pakistan once a year and meet my father. This time, when he came, he kept very quiet and kept hiding from me. When I asked him, he told me that your father's health was very bad and also told me that your mother had left your father and had remarried. I was very worried about my father, but my mother leaving my father was a source of joy and peace to me to some extent because my mother had been betraying my father's trust from the very beginning. It was good that she had left my father. I was just thinking that Shakir Bai said, "Don't ask me who your mother has remarried." I bowed my head. He grabbed my shoulder and said, "Your father is very ill." My eyes were moist with tears and my tongue was stuck. How could I tell Shakir Bai that? Since when have I been living with this torment in my heart and mind? That day was no less than the day of judgment for me when I saw him transgressing the limits and kept on sinking inside without mentioning it to anyone. I left without saying anything and did not come out of the room for some time. Shakir Bai came to my room with food at night and said that he would not eat without me. So I was forced to eat food to appease him. At the same time, I thought of my father, that my father would be alone at that time and there would be no one to take care of him. I told Shakir Bhai that I have to call my father here. Shakir Bhai said, "Of course, that's what I want to." After a few months of procedure, I called my father to my place. Now I take care of him myself. I have never tried to find out anything about my mother. She still calls me, but I do not receive calls as usual. And you all must be in this other place. If you are thinking about the child, let me tell you that he lives with his mother and that he is blessed with her.